think I'll wait for the chairs, if that's okay. Thank you. Okay, so welcome to the people online, and I'm going to sit down. And are you still seeing me? No, I have to stand up. So, great to see you all here. Great to see the people online. I'm Hannah Altorp. I'm a student still for another month at LBC College. And I wrote my dissertation on disagreement, on machloket. So, and you all have a handout, and for those online, we'll say the text, so hopefully you can join in as well with the thinking. What I want to do is really, so often when we talk about, when I started writing my thesis about machloket, I did because before I joined the college in a previous life, I was a reader in philosophy, and I was trained to do a lot of philosophical dialogue. So I thought it's nice I can join my philosophical background with the Jewish tradition of machloket and see what comes out of that. And then, of course, all the machloket happened in the last 2 years, so it became a very actual problem. How do we do good machloket? But what I want to do today is not so much say, oh, this is how you do it, and go home and practice, but rather think, what is it what we're doing when we are in disagreement? So my first question, and I want to make it very interactive. That's why you're all sitting in the first or second or third row, and I'm hoping you're all really still awake enough to engage and give good ideas. So my first starting point often is to ask, start from experience. So can you think of a good disagreement that you had? Really simple experience where you were in a disagreement and for some reason you thought that's a good disagreement. Many times. Okay, that's when you say you have this. Can you give us one that you're okay sharing? Okay, so if I understand, so if I understand you correctly, you have a sort of disagreement with God over Job, but you think it's a good one because you are respectful to. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for starting us off. So this is a sort of disagreement where you're not in agreement, but you do want to know where the other stands. Okay. Any others?
I was going to say the disagreement that we're having at the moment about how British Jews can comment on what's happening in Israel, and how we can agree to disagree about our different attitudes of these actions of the Israeli government.
And you think that's a good disagreement, what's now going on?
I think it's a very difficult disagreement, and how to disagree properly, it is very, very difficult.
Okay. So this is the idea that what we're doing now is, it's difficult. You're not sure it's good, though. Can I?
I think the disagreement is very, very healthy.
Okay.
I think the debate is very healthy, and it's necessary, but it's also a very difficult disagreement because people are very polarized and have very strong opinions on it. So it's a very difficult disagreement to have, but it's also a very important disagreement that we have to be able to work through to move forward.
Yeah. Okay, so this is really an example that I think is in all our minds, right? What we are talking about in British Jewry now, Palestine and Israel, I did notice, though, you didn't use the word good. You used the word healthy, important and difficult, which I think is really is significant, right? But it's important to have. It's a healthy debate, you would say. It's polarized, it's difficult, all those sort of things. Okay, and yeah, another one, and then... Yeah. Okay, that's a really, I'm just going to repeat it. Okay, is this better? Okay, thank you. I can put it on my lip or something. So this is the other example, an interesting one again. So you think the things where it's not so important? No, the example you gave of dropping bombs, I came a bit as a surprise to me, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay, so this is a really nice segue into reading our first text, right? But it's good to have a couple of examples, and you've given us very rich examples in the room. So this is where my philosophical head comes in. I always want to start thinking from the concrete and then get into what we're talking about from actual examples. So I have a couple of texts that I've brought. I was incredibly ambitious. It's 4 pages of text. I don't think I have until 1:15, I think. We won't go through all of them, but I just got very excited about this. So the first text is from Berachot 10a. And I think this is a good example of starting us off on thinking about machloket as a concept. So I got this from a book about machloket, and what was interesting to me was that the person added these texts because his students had said to him, his female students, you have to have some women in your book. So he'd written his dissertation, added some women. And interestingly, the women did not change the book, which I think, well, anyway, that's why the last text is in it as well. But let's read this and ask ourselves, like, what is the disagreement here? What is the machloket? So I keep translating machloket as disagreement. I think that's the best way to do it. It can also mean conflict. It's about division. But for now, we'll talk about disagreement. So what is it? And would you call it good? Yes or no? So I'll read so that the people online, if they can hear me, follow it as well. So this is how it goes. There were these thugs in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood who were causing him a good deal of trouble. And Rabbi Meir prayed that they should die. His wife, Beruria, said to him, what are you thinking? Because it's written, let chatayim cease. This is a quote from Psalms 104. Is it written chotim, sinners? It is written chatayim, sins. And then she goes on. Moreover, go to the end of the verse, is it, and there will be no more wicked, because sin shall cease when there will be no more wicked. Rather pray that they should repent, and there will be no more wicked. And he prayed for them, and they repented. And I think I can sit down now. So, question to you. Is this a good? What is the machloket here? Is there one? Is there more? Is it good, yes or no? God is always good. So where does God comes into it? That is good. So what's the machloket? What's the disagreement here?
Whether they should be killing the sinners or helping them repent so that there is no sin.
Yeah, so there's a machloket here between Rabbi Meir and his wife about what he should be praying for, right? Should he be praying for them to die, or should he be praying for them to repent? Is it a good one? Any other machloket? Let's first do any other machloket that you can see. This is a bit guessing the teacher's mind, but I. Okay, say more.
She brings evidence. It's clearly so convincing that he just says, "Oh, you must be right then," and changes what he's doing. But it doesn't. It's hard to comment if it's a good or bad disagreement because we don't see the two right.
Okay, so you can't say it because you don't know why you don't know what he's thinking or how he responded to her words. Say again? There's no conflict. Yeah. Okay, so there's two things going on here, I think, right? One is that Meir does not give much of a counter argument. He just says, yeah, I'm convinced, or he doesn't even say that. We just see what he does. And the other is that how she argues. So you say she brings in a third source, the Psalms, and that does the trick in a way. Yeah, go on.
That last line, I think both of them are okay. But I guess if they haven't repented, would that still would be remain convinced, right? So he starts to cause him trouble. He first was like, "Oh, we've got to get rid of the sins." She was like, "No, just you want them to stop sinning." And he has no power to do that, but he prays, and they do stop sinning. If they hadn't stopped sinning, if they'd remained sinners, would he have remained convinced, or would he have then thought, actually, you know what, it is the sin, it's the problem, not the sin?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think what you're onto, if I understand you correctly, so this is the last sentence, right? He prayed for them and they repented. And that sentence does something very typical in this text. And it's not there in all versions of it, which I think is interesting, and I think which is what you're partly alluding to as well, right? So we think it's okay because it ends well, right? They repent, he listens to his wife. It's such a nice Hollywood, they live there forever happily after ending. But the repention is, of course, there is something interesting about the fact that they don't get any confrontation directly between Meir and the thugs, right? There is nothing there. We don't know what they think either. We don't know what Meir thinks. And would they, if they had not repented, would he still have thought, or would we still have called it a good ending? And would Meir still have been convinced? Yeah.
But maybe that last line also shows solved maybe the machloket between Meir and the thugs. So it's a clear refinement, right? If he was there praying for their death, then the thugs would probably be like, "We're screwed and we'll keep on with our thugging." But because he's there instead praying for them.
Yeah, so the interesting part is the book itself thinks that the main machloket, so the book from which I got
That's it. There you go. You can just leave it here. Well, wherever you like, on there is fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so here we are. Now, I put a couple, let me think, what's a good way to go on? So the one famous quote, right, which was on the, if you have had one more click on the program you saw, is the Pirkei Avot quote. Do you all know it? Are you familiar with it? So that's the next one, right, where we say, every disagreement that's in the name of heaven will ultimately stand, but one that's not in the name of heaven will ultimately not stand. Which disagreements in the name of heaven? The disagreement between Hillel and Shammai. Which disagreement is not in the name of heaven? The disagreement of Korach and all his people. Now this we quote in extension at each other, and we say we should have a, machloket l'shem shamayim, and I never know actually whether we know what we're doing. So what does this tell us? If you had to say, right, what does it say here? What are the criteria for saying this is a good machloket, a good disagreement, a machloket l'shem shamayim? What does it say about that? The actual text.
I guess it has to be coming from a place of wisdom.
But the text doesn't say that, right? So I think, sure, excellent. But if you look at the text, what does it say?
It's comparing the scenarios, literally. So then you have to understand from what you understand of the scenarios what the text is trying to say. Or what we are told about the scenarios as well. The rabbis have a lot to say about Hillel and Shammai and Korach.
Yeah, so we have two examples. One is Hillel and Shamayim, and the other is Korach. Are you all familiar with what happens to Korach? It's okay if you're not.
No.
Excellent. So Korach, really nasty story. We'll come to it near the end of June, last weekend of June. Korach at one point says to Moses, it's too much. You're doing too much. You're taking all the power, da-di-da-di-da. And Moses says, really? And God interferes, and Korach and his entire group of people goes into the ground, babies, everyone, alive, swallowed by the ground, right? So Korach ends quite horribly alive in hell.
Online said it's beautiful.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you, online, and I'm sorry you missed the bit part. We're talking about disagreement, as you may gather. So Korach ends really, really bad, and he's protesting, and the rabbis go out of the way to explain what was so horrible about him. I always have a soft spot for Korach. Other people do too. I see their smiles, but he goes against Moses as a leader. So, and Hillel and Shammai are the other two examples of the good ones, right? The good ones. What is so we'll get a bit to them as well, but what is the other thing that says in this text? What does a machloket in the name of heaven, what does it do?
It has to hold weight. It has to hold water. It has to stand.
It has to stand, yeah. Right? It will ultimately stand. Any guesses what that means?
Maybe birds have like what we're doing now. Maybe back in the day with the sages and with the, for example, the Talmud and tractates, they would have had to agree on certain points or understand certain points. Maybe I'm looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah. So there's two ways to understand the standing then, right? So one would be that actually the outcome was still like whatever we come out with, we take with us outside. Or it is that we keep talking about it. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we're still not agreeing about this is a good sign. If we're still agreeing, if we now leave this, so there's actually, which could also almost be opposite. Like if we all leave this room in half an hour saying we figured it out. All of us have got one idea and we're carrying it out. That will stand. Or we could say we really don't agree. 7 different opinions, and at home a couple of more. We've done our best. That will stand. So it's actually quite interesting that it's not so clear what will stand. And I think it's just nice to realize that, because we quote this all the time at each other, right? It will stand, it will stand, it will stand. Okay, so those are the 2 examples. Are you still with me? Is it still okay? I know it's 10 o'clock, etc. Okay, so there is a couple of examples or ways of understanding this. And one is to talk about what is it that Hillel and Shmuel did, right? Or Hillel and Shammai did. And the good text from that is from Eruvin 13b, where it says, and I'll read it out to you. It's on the second page. Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. These said the halacha is in accordance with our opinion, and these said the halacha is in accordance with our opinion. A bat kol, a divine voice, emerged and said, both these and those are the words of the living God. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. And since both these and those are the words of the living God, why were Beit Hillel privileged to have the halacha established in accordance with their opinion? Because they were agreeable and humble, and they taught their own words and the words of Beit Shammai. Moreover, they prioritized the words of Beit Shammai to their own statements. So this says more about, this is a couple of things. One, it says, why do we go with Beit Hillel? And one, it says, how did they, what's a good way of going on with disagreements? Now, what's striking here? Now, let's first get, what is, does everyone know what a bat kol is, or a divine voice? It's translated as a divine voice. Those of us who were in the session with the clay, as you can see in my hands, have the other story of the oven of Aknai, where there's a bat kol as well. Those are the strange bat kols. Usually a bat kol sort of is a prophecy, but not that distinctive. Here it's quite interesting. A couple of famous phrases here. One is the bat kol says, these and those are the words of the living God. Again, that's something we quote a lot. But the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. And why is that? If you read the text.
Because Hillel seems to recognize that both are in accordance with the word of God and takes Shammai's argument into consideration with his own halacha.
Yeah. So at least they study it. I'm not sure they say take it into consideration, but at least they study it. Yeah, so we should probably take it into consideration. So they are coming from that perspective. What else are they?
Well, I would just ditto what she was referring to, maybe even to further that because he was humble enough to have wisdom to see that he would have to, well, maybe in his own mind, maybe he thought it would have to be fair and keep something fair and balanced. Even though that wasn't necessarily, yeah, okay, what am I saying? If I say it in a nutshell, he went beyond the letter. That's how I'm looking at it. He may have gone beyond what he was asked to do in the most humblest way.
Because Beit Hillel also studied the word of Beit Shammai.
Yeah. It does say his words were agreeable and humble.
Yeah.
And when it says they prioritise the words of Beit Shammai, that means Beit Hillel prioritised the words of Beit Shammai, right? Is that what that's saying?
Yeah, that's what that's saying.
In explaining the point of Beit Hillel, they would start by explaining the point of Beit Shammai.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you take away from this? Do you all think, oh, that's great, let's go with Hillel? Is it good enough reason for us? I mean, it's a bat kol, but can we go against the bat kol?
Last time I did. Fair.
There's a precedent of going against the bat kol, so we can do it just as well.
What would the reason, is there a reason why we go against this? Why? It's good enough, he's being reasonable, he's humble about it. I don't see an issue with it.
And similarly to the funny oven story last time, my understanding of the Beit Hillel stuff just tends to be that most rabbis agree with him. And so is it the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel? Really, because most of the rabbis agree with Beit Hillel. And even though the other views of Beit Shammai might also be true, because they aren't in accordance with the majority, they aren't the law. So it's not saying that these are necessarily wrong, but they're not the law because the majority of the rabbanim, they make the law, and they agree with Beit Hillel.
So this is a really interesting suggestion, because there's different versions of this story. And in one of the others, in Yerushalmi, you have two kinds of Talmud. You have a Bafli and a Yerushalmi. In the Yerushalmi, it also says Beit Hillel changed their mind if they thought Beit Shammai was right. It doesn't say that in this one. And I think there is something missing here, right? Because when you say it's the majority, that is how we always say it, but that's also a really scary thought sometimes, right? If we let something be decided by the majority, if the majority, yeah, well, I don't need to explain that that's a scary side, right? That is a really...
If it's not experienced, it's a dogma.
Okay, say a bit more. So if it's not experienced, then it's a dogma.
Yes, because it would be postulated.
Okay.
It's adopted without processing,
Yeah.
without the experiential learning.
So that's another risk, that it's adopted without actually being lived experience or argued or what have you, those sort of things.
Which the process requires.
Yeah. But there is some process here, right? There is the process of being humble, and there's the process of studying the other words, of prioritizing the other words.
You're right, something is missing.
Yeah, it's missing because you could say then, actually, well, just like now, however, very different times, of course, putting that into perspective. So maybe the optics of that would have been so easy, but for us to process something here and for us to make any sorts, which is not possible, but let's just pretend we were to make some tractates and not, like you said, let anyone to actually have that lived experience out in the outside world would be very strange. It makes me wonder, is it because it was just the times back then as well? Now, however, though, he did say that people would still, majority would still agree with this. So, base of generation, is it more based on tradition now? Because it's like, well, that's what we always do. Majority always goes with that.
Ah, okay, so then the majority, so this is different. How do we understand majority then, right? And so we've already said we find the majority quite a scary thing, but we could also say majority is the majority of the generations. I'm not sure it makes it slightly less scary, but perhaps at least it's...
It does feel like a bit of a politician move though, doesn't it? It's like, I'm going to express these words and then tell you my words, but I've heard, but that's
Yeah, I think that is part of the difficulty as well, that it feels like a politician. I mean, I think Beit Hillel was also humble, so that takes the politician a bit out, but it feels a bit like almost formulaic. I'll say what you say, I'll say what they say, and we go with what I'm saying. Whereas you want to have something, perhaps, that they agree on it because it's the right thing to do, right? There is nothing like that. So that is why I think it's interesting that there's also a Yerushalmi text, because there it says if they thought the other person had a better argument or was more right, they'd go with that. Here there is nothing of the better argument, the right position to take, da-di-da-di-da. It's more they were humble. And so we are trusting the process of being humble, of being kind, of studying all the words as being sufficient for coming to an answer that we might be happy with.
What would you say the best translation for the word halacha is?
Okay, why are you asking it?
Because if we translate it just to mean like law, are we saying that if you went with Beit Shammai stuff, even though these are the words of God, those are the words of God, depending on how you look at it, they are fine? Or are you saying that if it goes against halacha, it therefore is forbidden, and so isn't right? So are you, take the first one that comes to my head, is just like the Hanukkah one, you know,
Yeah.
8 down or 1 up. If you do it the Beit Shammai way, can you say, well, Beit Shammai like this, and Eruvin 13b tells me that those are the words of God just as these are? Or is the fact that the other one is halacha mean that if you take the Beit Shammai one, you are breaking religious law?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So what does halacha mean? It's like, what does it mean now? What do we do with the word of Shammai? And so the Orthodox commentaries, that for whom it's more of an issue than it is for us in some ways, will then say, well, no, both are the words of the living God, but now that we've decided that it's Hillel, you're going against the law indeed when you go with Shammai. So it's still the words of the living God, but don't do it, right? That's almost like we keep the position, but you shouldn't be doing that. So it becomes quite strict. It doesn't become an option anymore, but it remains as a minority opinion. Yeah. So there is this interesting shift here. So it's not that we can say, oh, both are, right? Because often this elu is taken as, both are the words of the living God. But if you read the next sentence, you know that, yeah, but you should only do one. So it isn't as nice and pluralistic as it's sometimes quoted to be.
So could you still, I'm so sorry, could you still use it to argue a later point? So if something comes up later, could you say, oh, well, Beit Shammai said this? Or would you say, well, no, Hillel said the other thing that we accept, and therefore we're not going to consider. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It depends who you ask. It depends who you ask. But if you ask people who really live according to halakha, no. Or they do it very, very cleverly. You have to be very clever.
I'm just thinking, because I'm sorry if this is taking me in the wrong path, but the question you're asking is about if the outcome feels satisfying.
Yeah.
But actually, when we're talking about machlochet, I'm thinking if the argument seems satisfying. I don't mean satisfying.
Yeah.
Convinced by either. And actually, these two rabbis, like most of Talmud, right, they're arguing for years.
Yeah.
And they're gaining from their arguments and they're learning from each other in the arguments probably, or just fully disagreeing with each other the whole time. But it's an ongoing conversation for 3 years where nobody, God has to get involved. They just could keep going and going. And for me, that feels satisfying. That feels like a good machlokes.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one. So we have different ways of saying whether something is a good machloket, and that is whether what's going on is good or whether the outcome is good. And I think it's really important to distinguish those two because they aren't always clearly distinguished. And so, for instance, with the Beruria example is so good for that reason because I think her argument's really clever. So the argument is good, but we could say, well, it's not very good because Meir doesn't give any sort of response. And we could also say the thugs, we're not even allowed to think about them, right? And that's actually quite important because Berune, they could also be, some of the arguments say, well, actually they are freedom fighters, right? They are in the Bar Kokhba revolt. So they are, what do we say? Yesterday's terrorists are tomorrow's freedom fighters or something like that. But the story does not allow them us anywhere closer to them. So there's something troubling there, at least for me. But you could also say, well, because perhaps there are some people we don't want to talk with. So there's something about how do we talk, and there's something about the outcome. And I often think we run to the outcome and don't have the discussion. And I have a good example for that. So that's slightly circumcising what you say, but shall we go there? And that's the next one. This is one of my favorite texts, actually, unless there's another question or comment on Eruvin. Yeah.
I've got experience being, like you said, I grew up Orthodox. So in a stranger way, I've got the best of both worlds. And I've got a disability, which makes it even more fun. But when I was still living with my parents, I saw a friend of mine on security outside shul. I know from a person of me, which had a go at him because he had the radio for the CST. So I was talking to him, asked him, he hadn't seen me for a while and he had this had a go at him in front of me. So I went home and it got me thinking. So I asked my dad, what do you do in that situation? And he told me the correct thing to do. But, so you get that side of it, so you get but when you've got a disability, you've sometimes got to change the scenario to make it easier for you. So, I know it's hard to believe, but from the age of 4, from yeah, from when I was born to the age of 4, I couldn't walk. So I had my parents had a debate with the rabbi, how do you get Benji to shul? Because he can't walk, however much he tried to. And the rabbi never gave my parents an answer. So they had to change. Sometimes when you're in that situation, in the front part, however way people look at it, if it's easy for the person and the other person doesn't understand it, it's not the other person's problem. They just make it their problem. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you give the example of you. So did you in the end go? Did the rabbi on purpose did not give your parents an answer so that your parents could just do?
He wasn't sure how to answer.
Ah, yeah.
He'd been in that scenario.
Yeah, yeah. But did you then go to shul or not?
I did, but it took a while to.
Or did you have to wait until you were walking?
Probably, but I've had people say to me, even where I live, I've had to change the way I do things, because when my parents were alive, I used to get, at the weekend where I live, we get called home to check if we're okay. And I went to school one time, EHRS, and they called me and I didn't pick up because one, I was in school and I didn't want to pick, or I didn't have my phone on me. And then they phoned my parents. My parents were Orthodox. And after showers, I get a call from my dad. Is everything okay? So I'm like, yeah, well, what's that? He said, on the support line from where we live called Mum and me because you weren't in.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, they've had to wait all day. So I've had to change the way I do things, because if I don't, it has a ripple effect.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a catch-22.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I see what you mean. So the tricky part becomes then, how do you negotiate your life between all those different questions?
And when I first started living where I am and going more reformed than Orthodox, my friends were like, but how are you managing to...
Yeah.
But I did say to one of my friends, the good thing about it is when I go to an Orthodox school, which is quite a bit, I can revert back into the way I used to be, to the way that I am. So I've got the best.
Yeah.
In a sense of way, I've got the best of both worlds, but sometimes you've got to bend. I'm going to sound dark, but slip a disc to do it.
Yeah.
It's right for you, because if you stick to the Lord and you need to change it, you can't, because...
You know what? The next text, I know this is an awkward segue, but it is true. The next text is for you, because he basically says, do what you like, as long as you keep shalom by it. More or less. Shall we have a look at it? It is actually, no, it's a perfect illustration. I know it sounds a bit as if I'm doing my segue into it, but it's true. It's true. So here we go. It's Derek Eretz Zuta. So this is a really interesting Talmudic text, because this text is the way of the lands, the short version of it. And as I was a student, I had to do the nerdy thing and look for the actual text. And in the library of LBC, there are two versions of it. One is from 1888 and the other is from 1935. So there's no sort of more recent version of this text. And I took the one from 1888 because it's, I think, the most controversial. The 1935 one is already a bit more mellow. And I really think this is such a wonderful text. So this is from a chapter where almost every line starts with "Great is Shalom." And I've included it because also what Anna said, often we think we rush to the end of a machloket in order to have peace, right? And I think especially however healthy or difficult we think the discussion between Palestinian and the Israeli-Palestinian community in our communities here is, we often rush to the end, or we actually never have that discussion because we want to keep peace. And this is how the text goes. It says, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar used to say, love peace, shalom, and hate disagreement, machloket. Great is peace, for even while Israel worshipped idols and there's peace between them, the divine presence, the Shekhinah, is, if that were possible, not able to touch them. I think that's such a fantastic sentence. And then it goes on, a synagogue, so there's a bit more, but I've left that out. A synagogue in which this disagreement will ultimately be a house of idol-worshipping hotheads, and a house in which there's disagreement will ultimately be destroyed. I think this is such a fantastic text for a number of reasons. One is, it basically says, as long as we keep peace, we can do whatever we like. Right? we can be idol worshipping as long as we're not idol worshipping hotheads. So as long as we don't get sort of all excited about it, we can do whatever we like. And I like it because it says the divine presence is as if that they were possible, not able to touch them. So there is some sort of like, we feel uncomfortable with the thought, but it's there. So in the milder version from 1935, it says, I think the Blessed Holy One does not want to touch us. And the word for touch can also mean strike, right? So I mean, it's not just like a patch on the head or something like that. It's killing. So I think this is a really interesting text for a couple of reasons, but I want to hear your response as well. But I've sort of said them. I think one, it emphasizes the big thing of shalom, and it goes almost in the overdrive. At the same time, it then means do whatever you do. And I wonder to what extent this sometimes influences our thinking about machloket and what it says, hate machloket. Okay, go for it.
At the same time, because it makes sense. I must love some part of it, otherwise it would be reform. However, there's something about it that's like, well, what? There's no boundaries. Excuse me. It feels like, because I agree with the peace part of it, but I'm struggling with the, okay, as long as it's, I didn't see that, but as long as you're in peace. Because I'm thinking, well, it kind of goes against Shema. It's like, it goes against Deuteronomy, and it's a contradiction here, and I'm struggling with that.
Because of the idol worshipping, yeah, that's your real problem. Yeah, I think it is a real problem. Yeah, go on.
Okay, right. I was not sure whether I should disclose it, but I just realized that I'm borrowing this wisdom when I deal with colleagues at work. I'm an educator from Royal College of Psychiatry, and all my senior trainees are Muslims now. And I'm very focused on peace, actually, and very alert about disagreements at the moment. So this, insight now validates somehow the way I stay split deep inside myself when I have my identity and my position, but on the surface, I agree with the what's the adjective for idealism, because it's there, and some people they tend to manifest it because they are empowered by the social environment these days.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, but I'm so focused to charge myself with peace. And if I'm not focused on the peace, I might easily go into what disagreement with me. Very easy.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think why it's, if I understand you rightly, why it speaks to you too is because not having peace can get to really nasty situations, right? And so
inside myself.
Yeah, and inside your, yeah, but in yourself, yeah. But I think there's two things, because one is sort of when we don't have peace, it can go already quite quickly. Like here it says it will be destroyed, right? And some of the imagery, if you then do some research, is really nasty kind of destruction. It's really, not having peace is really destructive. At the same time, if I understand you right, you also say, but that means inside myself, it's peace outside, but inside myself, I'm not sure whether I should be doing this. But just the risk of not having peace is very scary. Yeah.
Because are they saying really overall, in a nutshell, well, we can't say it's a nutshell of anything, I guess there's no proof. But you could say maybe this is the lesser evil overall, at the worst case scenario. At the worst case scenario? Is that what you could
So the worst case scenario would then be you get destroyed.
Right, okay, so let's say, for example, God forbid.
Which is the worst case scenario. That does sound bad. Okay.
But let's pretend someone's like, okay, let's just ruin the synagogue. It's like, well, okay, the world's gone crazy, but okay, do you need, no, we want idols now. I don't know, God forbid, that's just the idea, right? Let's just say that then this would be the worst case scenario. We're like, oh no, yeah, fine, do that. We love our synagogues in the world.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's a really tricky one. I'll come to you in a second. It's a really tricky one because you can also think, if you think about Shalom Bayit. So somebody, when I read this text in another group, said sometimes peace is kept in a house at detrimental damage to some of the people there, right? I mean, it's a really difficult text. You had a comment.
Yeah, this feels to me just like incredibly un-Jewish as a concept. I mean, even if you take it back just to like Abraham, or like, I mean, if you take it to the Midrash or whatever, of Abraham smashing up the idols to have the argument with his dad about it, but I mean, more specifically, Abraham arguing with God about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then you take that and you look and Moses argues with God, actually over this specific thing pretty much, right? The people very peacefully down the bottom of Mount Sinai are there worshipping the golden calf, and God wants to destroy them, and it's only Moses disagreeing that stops the destruction. Disagreeing, I mean, the whole Talmud is, you know, like, after this, I don't know, but I imagine it says, and what's his name, says this, however. I mean, it's just like...
No, this is actually basically the end. This is the end of the book.
Like the whole... The way that we do everything is through kind of this, like, dialectical argument. True.
I'll come to you in a sec. True, but there's lots about greatest, Gadol Shalom. There's lots about that here in other texts as well. So it's not as un-Jewish as you would think. And what's interesting is then, of course, we say, machloket, but only in very specific situations, because the threat of destruction is really felt very real by the rabbis. So some even argue that we just introduced the word machloket in order to distinguish it from all the things where it can go already.
So to confirm, like I said, this would be like worst case scenario. Because that makes sense to me. That makes more sense to me now.
They weren't pretty bad. Though, if you look at the first book of Tanakh, they're all a bit nasty.
Yeah. There's not much shalom in there, that's for sure. You've been waiting with a question.
Well,
Yeah.
so following on from that, I mean, are there different types of disagreement? Are there different words for disagreement? Or is malachit the only word for disagreement?
So good question. So there's two ways to answer it. One is, yes, there are different types of, that's why Hillel and Korach, why this is done. That distinction is made. But I always think that's made just to name the distinction rather than to have it. The other is yes, but machloket is really what the rabbis then start making. So earlier they use other words, like revi'i and all that. This is created, I think, well, one of the commentators argues, so that we could say there is good and bad machloket. And basically also so we could say there's lots of machloket that we don't want to go anywhere near. And I'll just, because this is the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah. I'll just have you one more thing, and then we can talk much more.
Why wouldn't this not be, we won't touch that though? Because I agree with his sentiment that this is very un-Jewish.
Well, it's the Shekhinah who won't touch you. I mean, it can't get much more Jewish than that. No, that is, I think it's a bit of a hyperbole, but it is to say how important.
It just feels like an emergency case scenario mindset. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. Okay. We do one more, and we end on that. I encourage you to read the one on the back because that's the best, but it's too long. I just want to read this one on the top of Yevamot. So that is Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef differed over an argument until they tore a Torah scroll in their anger. Right? So you might think, okay, it's machloket is good as long as the rabbis are doing it. Hillel and Shammai, the arguments, Beruria, quoting Psalms. And now we have this scenario. And it goes about ego because Elazar quoted an idea from Rabbi Yosef, but didn't say it was from Rabbi Yosef. I mean... And then here at this point, sometimes the Gemara steps into the story with its own voice. And then, so it says, they tore. This is when the writer of the Gemara almost wants to sort of have their voice. And it says, can it enter your mind? Can that really be the case? And then it says, say instead that the Torah scroll was torn through their anger. So it's the passive voice rather than the active voice. And Rabbi Yosef Kisma was there and said, I would be surprised if this synagogue does not become a place of idolatrous worship. And this happened. So you see lots of stuff happening here. One is the rabbis are not safe themselves from this kind of disagreement that comes with destruction, right? And the Gemara almost does not want to attribute that idea to them, which I think is interesting. And then the last thing is, and this happened. You have again a sort of, well, not a happy ending, but you have a nice closing ending to it. So this is this, yeah, I think I need to stop. But so we're stopping mid-argumentation. Yeah, thank you. Right there, I say we'll have it there. No, but it was real fun talking to you. Yeah.